Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cryptid Crew Podcast. My name is Mark Childers, and I've got a great show planned for you today. Before we get started, if you've had an encounter or an experience, please shoot me an email with your contact information at the Cryptid Crew Podcast at gmail.com. Our guest today is a folklorist, publisher, writer, author. He's a professor at the University of West Alabama. His name is Dr. Alan Brown. Glad to have you on, Alan.
Hello, I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Thank you for coming on. And I'd like to just dive right into this. I know you've written several books. I've read a couple of them, Eerie Alabama and Unexplained South. But let me ask you this: what got you interested in, I guess, the world of the unexplained?
Oh, it goes way back. And back in the 60s, I lived in Alton, Illinois, which is close to St. Louis, and they used to show these old movies 2:00 in the afternoon on Saturday. And that's what got me interested in weird stuff like that. But I'll tell you, I really became interested in cryptids in 1972. I saw the movie Legend of Boggy Creek.
Right.
It's about the Falk monster. And that really got me hooked. And so I began collecting as many books as I could about Sasquatch. And I'm still interested in it. Right now I'm watching the Travel Channel show, Expedition Bigfoot.
Yes. It's one of the shows that I watch as well.
But you know, it troubles me because I'm afraid that one of these times during these night investigations that they're going to disturb a bear.
Right. I believe on one of the seasons they have had an encounter with a bear, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
Surprised it hasn't happened more often. But I guess that's what keeps me watching the show.
Yeah. Me as well. I'm not sure if you're a fan of Expedition X, which is the show that comes on Travel Channel as well. But they had a episode last night on the Florida skunk ape, which was pretty intriguing and interesting. Some interesting evidence they had found as well. Pretty neat.
Is it hosted by Josh Gates?
It is, correct.
Yeah, he's great.
He is. He really is.
He doesn't take himself very seriously. Now, the investigators in Expedition Bigfoot do, but Gates seems to be having fun with this, and that's one thing that endears the show to me.
Well, let me ask you this. In your book, Eerie Alabama, you describe, or you have a story of the Alabama White Thang. Could you go into a little bit of detail about that?
Yes, and it is pronounced White Thang.
Right. Looking at you.
And these are, comparatively speaking, I guess they're fairly recent sightings. They began in the 1930s, and the creature is 7 feet tall and sometimes walks on all fours. Now that's unusual. Most of the Bigfoot sightings I've read about have dealt with a two-legged monster, but this one walks on all 4 feet. And I guess there have been many encounters of this beast. He screams too, and which adds, I think, to the fear element. But the Alabama Bigfoot Society's website from 2016 has a story about a man in Clay County who heard a noise in the yard next to him, and there was an elderly lady who was hoeing in her vegetable garden, and she saw this monster, or this beast, eating her vegetables. So she chased it. She charged it with her hoe, and the monster took off.
The brave woman. I'm not sure if I'd have chased something like that with a garden tool, but
So I like that story. And there are others. There's a story of a family in Blount County in 2013 where had just moved into this old house that they were planning to renovate. This is north of Oneonta, and on this one day, the man and woman were in the front yard, and all of a sudden their son, who was in the back, came running to them, saying that he had seen a white-haired monster in the ditch. And he said as soon as he made eye contact with the creature, it slowly walked into the woods, and the kid was frantic.
right.
And he was positive that he had seen this 9-foot white monster.
Right. So it was bipedal then, for sure.
Oh yeah. At that point, yes.
Yes.
It was. Yeah. And then there's the Downy Booger. Booger is an old folk word for any kind of strange creature. And this story is found on I believe it's the Winston County website. And this began in 1890. There were two brothers who had ridden on horseback. They had gone to a dance at a house owned by Oscar Tittle. And as they were riding back, and this was late at night, they had just reached a sandy part of the road, and this beast, this hairy creature, stood in front of them. It appeared out of nowhere. Horses reared up. They ran around and went back to Tittle's house. Well, boys wanted to go home. So So they climbed back on their horses. They tried to ride back the way they had come. And when the horses reached that one spot, that sandy spot, they wouldn't go any farther. And so they went back to Tittle's house, spent the night, took a detour, spent the night there. And then next morning they were able to go home. And because of that, it's now called the Downy Booger. That's the monster that has their name. But I also like the story about the moonshine. A lot of these encounters took place in the 1890s.
Right.
Around 1890. And there was a moonshiner who had a wagon loaded with several barrels of whiskey. And he was planning to sell them at Galloway. And he happened to look over his shoulder and saw this hairy monster loping behind him. And so he grabbed his pit. He knew he couldn't outrun him because the wagon was too slow.
Right. With mules.
With mules, yeah. So
yes.
He pulled out a pistol and started firing. And the creature screamed. He said it screamed like a woman and took off and limped away. Later they found a few patches of blood, but to this day we don't know if this guy killed it or not. Mm-hmm. Yes, this is about 15 years ago. I gave a presentation at Oneonta, and I spoke there around 7 o'clock, and by the time I was on my way home, it was dark. And that is a scary place at dark, at night. So I can see why people have encounters or see things. So, and, who knows? They see them at dark. It could be a creature, it could be something else.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. What do you think they may be? Or what do you think the White Thang could be, or the Downy Booger? Or are they the same? Just one might be albino and the other, it's natural color.
I think the general consensus is that the White Thang is an albino version of the Bigfoot. I don't know, and I don't know if there are any bear sightings in Alabama. I know there are a few.
There have been, I don't mean to interrupt you, but yes, there has been in the county I live in. There's been a couple. One was on the news where they had it on the news not too long ago. But I know there's some black bear around here as well.
Yes, I know it just occurred to me that in Sumter County, which is where I teach, this couple years ago, there was a black bear sighting. We have them in Mississippi too. But I was really surprised to find that there were bears in Alabama. So that it's possible that that's what people have been misidentifying as Bigfoot creatures. Well, you normally think of Bigfoot as being identified with the Pacific Northwest.
Correct.
With states like Oregon and Washington. But we have our share of them down here too. And they don't all go by the name of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Like you've got the skunk ape and the cabbage beast in Louisiana and Florida. But it's basically the same thing.
Can I ask you about another thing that you had in your Eerie Alabama book? Yes, that was the Orion Williamson disappearance.
Oh, yeah.
That happened, I believe it was in the 1850s in Selma, a farmer that had disappeared in front of his family, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah, that's an interesting story because I believe it gained a second life because of Fate magazine. And there are people now who've looked at it again and have decided that this could have been taken from a story by Ambrose Bierce.
Okay.
The difficulty in crossing a field. So that's one of those tales that I'm kind of on the fence about.
Right.
And it's great. I remember reading it. I read the Ambrose Bierce story before I read the pen version, and it seemed like something that maybe could happen. Someone entered another dimension, you know.
Well, what intrigues me about the story is there's multiple witnesses, and the horses. I guess I had read the horses were apparently out in the field, and I don't know if they got out of whatever containment they were in previously and may have noticed something. I don't know themselves. Animals have a way of noticing things that we don't. But yeah, I was really, really fascinated by that story for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And the thing I like about Bierce is that he was, I guess you could say, just successfully to Edgar Allan Poe in America when it comes to horror stories. And he was writing the second half of the 19th century. And that one, but Orion Williamson, that still resonates with people.
Right.
And it's eerie. I guess that's that's the best way to describe it.
Sure. Let me ask you this, Alan. Have you ever had any experiences or encounters of yourself that you could not explain?
Yeah. Let me think. Okay. The one I always talk about occurred in, let's see. This might have been 20 years ago. I was invited to the annual meeting, Louisville Ghost Hunter Society.
Okay.
And this would have been around, I guess, October. And afterwards, we went out to the Louisville Tuberculosis Sanitarium, one of the most haunted places in the country.
Wow.
Yeah, and so we had barbecue out there. They had a tent set up, and Keith Age, who was the director at the time, he lined people up, and the guys in his group took them on a tour of the east side. Well, I was eating with Keith, and I was eating with Troy Taylor, who's the president of the American Ghost Society, and a couple other guys. And Keith came up and said, "We're going to go on the west end." There was nobody there. So Keith took the lead. We were walking up these steps, went up to the third floor. And Troy was standing in front of me, and Keith walked up to the third floor landing, and he walked over to the door, and and was going to open. It was an iron door, and he was going to open it up. All of a sudden, that door opened and slammed shut by itself. Well, this guy, he's a big guy. He's an ex-football player. He screamed like a girl. Troy was standing in front of me, and we were on the steps now. He jumped backward, almost knocked me over. And I was not happy. I was angry. So I was sure that one of those members of his group was standing on the other side of that door messing around. So I walked up and grabbed the handle, and that door was heavy, a heavy iron door. I opened it up with great difficulty, and I looked up and down the hallway, didn't see anything. I looked down in front of me, and there was a single wet footprint about the size of a woman's foot. That is the scariest thing I've ever seen.
How close were you guys to the door when it slammed?
I'd say we were probably 5 feet.
Oh, so y'all were right there then beside it.
Oh yeah, right
pretty
there.
Much.
Right there. And that story has affected us so much that Troy's written about it, and I've written about it more than once. And it sticks with me, and I think about it all the time. And there are things out there that we just can't explain right now. And I'd never had an experience like that before. And that's one of the top 10 haunted places in the country, and I can see why.
You have what book is that you have that in?
Let me think. Oh,
like I could have.
Oh, yeah. It would be Kentucky, Legends and Lore of Kentucky, or Kentucky Legends and Lore. It's in that one.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be an interesting read. And I'll put a link, too, at the bottom. I've had an interesting experience myself probably a year ago, and I did not tell my wife for about 6 months. And I told a friend of mine that is really interested in the paranormal, and he just kind of laughed. But I was up, I guess around midnight, maybe 1 o'clock, getting something to drink in the kitchen. And there was only one light on in the kitchen at the time. And out of the corner of my eye, orb of some sort, not dust or not a bug. It was a ball of light. Went by my right side and through the wall and disappeared. And then I disappeared from the kitchen shortly after that. But you're right. There are things that are we can't explain and don't understand, and maybe not meant to understand.
Could be. I really believe that there are some people who are more sensitive to the spirit world than others. I'm married to one. My wife and I go to haunted bed and breakfast all the time, and she's the one that has experiences during the night. I don't. And that's ironic because she's a retired math teacher. Very logically minded.
Right.
I want to see these things, and I don't. But she does all the time.
And she's not, I'm assuming she's not expecting to see anything, or just...
It happens. Well, for example, when, we went to the Myrtles in Louisiana, and we were sitting in front of this fountain, and we were having a drink, and Marilyn said, "Why don't we take pictures of the fountain?" It was at night. I said, "Fine." So she took a picture and looked at it, and she look at this, and there was this mist there, and oh my God! So I grabbed my picture. Grabbed my camera, took a picture. Nothing. And I really think the Myrtles in St. Francisville is right up there with Louisville Tuberculosis Sanitarium. It's one of the most haunted places.
Right.
For sure. And I have no explanation for that mist. It was kind of an amorphous shape. I'd say it was probably about six feet high, but it didn't look like a person. No. It looked like a little cloud, a little wisp of fog, but it was visible on the camera. Now, by the naked eye, no. And not very many people have the kind of experience you had with all. Most people film them.
Because I was not anticipating on seeing anything.
Yeah.
But where I live, we have We have found arrowheads and other things nearby. Don't know, but not real sure what that was.
Do you know the history of your house?
I do, yes. My grandfather built it in the mid-'70s. And so it's not that old. Well, I say it's not that old. It's a little bit younger than I am, so I'm going to say it's not that old. In 1974, I believe.
That's the same year my house was built.
Okay.
And nothing happens in my house. But you know, houses can be built on property. The property itself is haunted. The land is haunted, not. And so the house, the spirits from the site find a new home in the house.
A friend of mine, Joshua Darren, he mentioned that as well to me, that, if there was if I knew any history about the property itself, and said it could have been just anything, so especially with, I guess, Native American activity here, you don't ever know.
Yeah, that's true.
Let me transition into something else in one of your books, the Alabama Buried Giant.
Yeah, that one, again, that's one of these that kind of seems apocryphal. It has to do with the discovery of giant skeletons in 1886 in Georgia. Well, actually, these skeletons have been discovered in Georgia and Tennessee as well, but the ones that I wrote about were found by Etowah farmers along the Coosa River, and the skeleton was supposed to be so big that the man who discovered it could place his hand inside its skull. The skull, 3 times larger than an ordinary man.
Right.
And the skeletons are put on display, and no one knows where they are now. They're just gone. That seems to happen a lot. I've read several accounts of giant skeletons, and they always disappear. And it seems that if you look at the accounts of explorers, that they have written accounts of encounters with giant natives of the area, such as Nano DeSoto troops, supposedly oversized natives in the Florida Panhandle. And there are, it's not just the South where they have found these. They found them in New York as well. I don't know what they've been found in South Carolina, but they just, again, they're gone. And I don't know why that is.
Right. That's intriguing for sure.
Yeah. I'd like to mention at least one other story that is in my book. And this has to do with the wampus cats.
Okay.
And wampus cat, at least in the Deep South, is a blanket term used to refer to any large, unknown feline creature. And most of the wampus cat sightings are in Tennessee. It's a Cherokee legend, and it has to do with a Cherokee woman whose husband went hunting, and she knew that when these guys went hunting, when the men went hunting, that they had this special magic ritual that assured that they would have success. And so she did what she was not supposed to do. She followed him and the other men into the woods, and they were in their circle having their ritual, and one guy saw her. Well, she had wrapped herself in a mountain lion skin to keep warm, so he cursed her. He transformed her into a beast, she's half woman, half mountain lion, and she roams the woods and screams, howls. And people have encountered her. Some of the early settlers have encountered her. There's a story of a man who was hunting and he heard something behind him. He turned around and he saw this giant cat. So he ran back to his cabin, slammed the door shut. The beast was pounding on the door, trying to get in. And with his back to the door, he grabbed his Bible and read from Psalms, and it disappeared. Yeah, and like I say, these are stories from Tennessee. Now, Alabama has its own wampus cat stories, and one of these is very strange. The story goes that during World War II, the federal government was doing a series of experiments in the backwoods of Alabama to try to create a hybrid, a mountain lion and a gray wolf, that would serve as a very swift-running messenger that they could attach messages to, and supposedly some of them got.
Right.
That always happens. They always get out, and now they're roaming the woods, creating havoc. But there is a story of a more conventional wampus cat from New Cahaba Cemetery, which is close to Selma. And in 1980, there was a young man who went up with some of his buddies to the cemetery because he had heard of this strange cat, and they heard it scream. So they took off. Then they decided to come back a few days later, and one of them imitated the scream of the cat, and then they heard something jump on the back of their car. When they took off, when they came home, they saw these deep scratches in their car. Now, I have had an encounter with something that I think might have been a wampus cat. And this was October. This is October. I'd given a presentation. I give a lot of ghost themed presentations in October, and I'd given one around Thomasville, and I was driving back, and I decided to take a shortcut on Highway 28 to go back to Livingston. And I was maybe a mile of the road from Highway 80, and I saw this large creature run across the road. It was not a dog, bigger than a dog, and I got a couple seconds glimpse of it, and it had a long tail. Now, I don't know if I've heard that there were cougars in the area, but turns out that the guy I carpool with, we live in Meridian, Mississippi, and he lives in Lauderdale, Mississippi, in the country. He has heard something, seen something that is a large cat-like creature, and he has seen its footprints. Unfortunately, he didn't take plaster cast of it, but there's something that lives out in his woods. So I am a firm believer in wampus cat. Now, I don't know if they're supernatural creatures. Probably not.
Right. I'm in the camp with you on that as well. I believe there's some type of large cat that I guess the wildlife officials may deny that's in Alabama, but
yeah,
there's been a lot of sightings, it seems. What color was the cat that you saw? Or could you tell?
It was hard to tell. I have this memory of something being kind of a yellowish tan.
Okay.
But again, I only saw it for a few seconds. Maybe 2 seconds, 2 or 3 seconds. It was going in fact, had I been going any faster, I would have hit it.
So you were fairly close to it then when you saw it?
Very close. It was maybe 3 feet away from the front of my car when I saw it.
Right. Yeah, I've had a neighbor that he had, I think, about 90 acres, which connects to several hundred acres, fairly rural area, close to Chambers County, Alabama. And he was on a golf cart, electric golf cart, and I want to say that because of the noise. I'm assuming the gas golf carts make quite a bit more noise. But he was riding some of his property, and he told me, he said, Mark, he said, I think I saw a black cat. And he said, I'm not saying like a house cat, a large fairly large cat. And he was probably, I think he told me, maybe 100 yards from it. And it took off and had a long tail, very long tail, longer than, longer than a house cat and bigger than a house cat. But of course, they're not supposed to exist from what I understand. But I know there's been multiple sightings of a black cat of some sort.
Yeah. 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 There's something out there in these deep woods. And
sure.
In fact, I am right now, I'm finding it easier to believe in the wampus cats than in Bigfoot. Mostly because I haven't seen a Bigfoot.
Right. I can understand that. There's just trace evidence. You have witness sightings, and then you have plaster cast and supposedly hair as well. And I believe some of the cast, from what I understand and read and have seen, have what you call, I guess, the dermal ridges that primates have. But yeah, I do agree. There's definitely something that's in the woods that we don't.
I'm fascinated by the possibility that they exist, but I'm not curious enough to want to go into the woods at night looking for them.
Right. I have not been in the woods at night to look, but I have done a little bit of investigating of a couple of sightings that have been reported. I went to the locations and such here in Alabama, but not at night.
No,
I'd have to be with someone else and not by myself for sure.
Someone who is packing heat.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Some protection for sure.
When you went out there, did you get the plaster cast of the tracks?
No, I did not. It was. I believe the sighting I went to look at happened in 2013.
Oh.
In Cleburne County, Alabama, which is up north, kind of east side of Alabama, northeastern side.
Yeah.
And I went maybe 2 years ago just to check out the site because there was quite a bit of detail of where it was at. And it was rural, very rural, but it was also close to a large highway. So not real sure, but very interesting nonetheless. Well, Alan, I have really enjoyed this. This has been fantastic talking to you. And I'm hoping maybe I can get you back sometime and we can talk about Haunted Pensacola and some of the other paranormal books that you have.
I'd love to talk about Pensacola.
Yes.
One of my favorite towns to visit. Been there several times.
Yeah, very, very neat town for sure. Well, I have a friend that lives close by in Gulf Breeze, and I enjoy going to Pensacola for sure.
I have one of the things I like about Pensacola is that it's known for its lighthouse, the haunted lighthouse there, and they sell my book in the lighthouse, which is great. They also sell my Haunted Texas book in the Alamo.
Neat.
Which
really neat.
Really help book sales, I must say.
I have been to the Alamo, so that's really neat.
Yes.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, enjoyed having you. And again, if anyone would like to, like, share, and subscribe. If you had an encounter or an experience, just shoot us an email at the Cryptid Crew Podcast at gmail.com. And again, Dr. Brown, thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.